Hey y'all, Cam here. What's up? I just want to say off the bat that if you have no interest in what's going on with the channel, then I'll go ahead and put up the graphic that you probably saw in the thumbnail here. And then also, if you go to the description, you can click on the specific dungeons that you want. That'll talk about the loot that you can find in there, as well as my reasoning for why it's a good or bad dungeon to run. For those of you that do care about the channel, I wanted to thank you specifically for your support on the last video. Like anyone who did anything, fantastic. Thank you so much. I couldn't believe it. It exceeded all my expectations. It was fantastic. So welcome to all the new subscribers. It was really cool. My goal for that video was to get 1 after my last video got none. So that was achieved and beyond. So let's talk about this video and the status real quick. So you can see my setup is different. That is because my fiance and I spent a lot of time this weekend shopping and setting stuff up. We're going to be doing a full setup here in the near future, but we're kind of in between, which is why you see things the way they are. Also, I did record most of our work on it, as well as I'll probably plan on recording what we do next. And so I may make a video in the future about the setup and what we did, and maybe like some time lapses. My fiance, sorry, we're relatively freshly engaged. She said that I should make a montage of her bonking her head under the desk, because she said she bonked it like 10 times. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe and look forward to that. I wanted to go ahead and include at this part of the video what my general strategy is likely to be. Again, all is subject to change, but I'll just go ahead and put it up so you can see it. I'm not going to talk through it all the way. You can kind of read exactly what the plan is. So let's go ahead and talk about the purpose of this video. Now I'll mention ahead of time, because I'm not going to call it out in the video, that I think BFD is it's still going to be a 3-day lockout, and Blizzard had said that it's going to give good XP. So I think BFD is probably what you should be running at level 25 with your current talent setup. And then once you finish that, get 26, then at that point, I think you're going to get your 26 skills, respec to your leveling spec if you'd like, and then go towards wherever you're going to go. So anyway, I'm going to talk about these dungeons individually. I would use this as a nice starting point, this graphic here. And then I'm going to talk about loot that you should be looking out for in these given dungeons, depending on your armor class and your primary stats. All right, let's go ahead and start with SFK. Now, I would highly recommend not spending any time in SFK if you can. There's a multitude of reasons, which I'll get into here in a second. But I think ideally you want to be doing quest stacking, which I'm not going to be doing on any of my characters, but all mine are alliance basically. I would do quest stacking on your characters and then do BFD. And I think at that point you probably should be like 28, and you can look to go into graveyard or RFK potentially at the start. Let's talk about why SFK is bad now. There's a lot of reasons, but the top few are that there are a lot of magical immunities. There's an anti-magic shield as well. You have some RP between the first boss and the courtyard, and then you have a curse that's 75% healing reduction that would really need to be decursed or bubbled or something. And then you have an AoE silence that is just really annoying, that the mobs from the middle to the back half will use. So you really don't want to spend time in here if you don't have to. So for our alliance players, let's go ahead and talk about Stockades. Now there's not really any loot, so I'm just going to skip that part here. Getting to it is quite simple, obviously, because it's in Stormwind. I do think that if you're a relatively geared-ish group, maybe even not that geared, you're going to run into the 5 dungeons per hour cap. So that's most likely going to be your limiting factor to Stockades. I would say that your goal with Stockades in general is trying to get out of here at level 29, maybe 28 to go to RFK. You could go to GY as well, but that's going to suffer from the same problem of being too short. I'll talk about that more later in the video. Let's go ahead and talk about what is in Stockades. Now you're going to find a lot of disarms here. You're also going to find a knockdown from some of the renegades, I think it is. You'll also find fears. So this dungeon isn't very nice to melee, I think is safe to say. And because of that, I would highly recommend a paladin tank here. That would be your best bet for sure. And I also would say a little tip, having your paladin run from room to room picking these up is probably not the way to go. What I would consider doing is having each of your DPS and your tank pulling from individual separate rooms, and then have them all kind of meet up in one room or whatever in one of the main areas, and then that way you're able to pull these without your paladin tank getting dazed and messed around with, and he can set up properly with that consecration. All right, let's talk about RFK now. I went ahead and made a couple of PowerPoint slides regarding the mobs that I think you should be concerned about, as well as the loot pieces you should be paying attention to. Now, this is still a relatively low-ish dungeon compared to some of the ones you can have closer to cap, so the loot really won't be that helpful most likely, but it will be a stepping stone into just making you stronger on your progress to level 40. So let's talk about the mobs within RFK and kind of why they're annoying. Now, there are some that are not listed here, and it's just because at that point I'm including every mob in RFK. I would say keep an eye out for healing totems. Now, there are a few of different ones that do healing totems that aren't on here. So if you see a healing totem, maybe make a macro as well. Target that down and knock that out, especially if you're doing AoE pulls with this. So looking at first, we got Razorfin Totemic. Earth Grab Totem, which is a little bit annoying, but I haven't really seen much issue with this. So like if you're stacking on it, yes, you're going to get, slowed or rooted, but I haven't had a ton of issue with that. It's also got Healing Ward, like I just mentioned. There's Death Head Acolytes, which have mana burn. This is obviously an issue. To combat this, you kind of stay near a wall, let your healer be able to kind of, LOS that around as he tries to mana burn them. We've got Defenders. I put Defenders on here because you essentially, as a healer, this is for you. Like, you don't want to be standing next to these guys on pull, or really you shouldn't be standing next to anything, but keep these guys in mind specifically. They can shield bash, and one thing that's pretty common with mobs in general, like, they don't have to be targeting you to be shield bashing you. So even if you don't have threat and you're standing next to this guy, he potentially could interrupt your cast, so stay away. Then we have Ground Shakers. Now these guys do just like an AoE stun on a pretty short cooldown that's really annoying. I don't think it's actually 5 seconds, but anyway, you don't want to deal with this, obviously, if you have a big pull. So it's important to focus these guys down first, and don't do them in your big pull, those kind of things. So keep these guys in mind. Near the end of the dungeon, you're going to have crawlbats or crawlbats, whatever you want to call them. And the regular ones don't do anything particular, but the greater ones do have an AoE silence. If you've done this dungeon before, you know what I'm talking about. So keep those in mind as well. Let's go ahead and talk about RFK loot for a second. Now, the structure I'm going to use for all of these is like loot that's the best at the top, and kind of as you go down, it's not quite as good. Now, it's going to depend on your comp and class and everything like that, if any of this even matters to you. But I will say for RFK, Corpse Maker is a great axe, very slow, which is what you're looking for at 3.8 speed. It's also got 29 DPS and high strength on it. The weapon from BFD is 3.5, the epic weapon, 3.5 speed. So this is just going to be better in every way. So all those two-handed classes are going to be looking for this thing. So it's important to run this to grab that for them. Now, it's not going to be BIS or anything, but this will really speed up your clears, because if you have an arms warrior doing sweeping strikes and then soon to be whirlwind, right? Because you would have whirlwind at the time you're picking this up, then they're going to be doing a ton of extra damage, speed everything up for all of you. The other piece I want to mention is the shield. Now, the shield isn't great, but it does have 2 additional block value on it, which is great if you're doing larger pulls. So that mention, and then Furline leggings. Now, this is just going to be a pure DPS upgrade for anyone that's still using Leggings of the Fang from last phase. So these will be replaced with no more quest items. Those Trip Runner Dungarees. I actually said that properly for this cut. That's great. So they're not essential, but they are pretty good. Also, the shank isn't bad if you don't have a great dagger offhand on your rogue from BFD or something. And then lastly, I want to talk about the Night Stalker bow. This is a good bow for your rogues and maybe warriors who don't have the weapons from BFD that give you additional stats like the 5 strength or the 6 agility that you can get. So this is a good time to pick that up for now. It's not a very good bow. It's extremely fast, which is not what you're looking for hunters. But in general, that agility will be useful for those classes. I mentioned this a couple other places, but quick call out, I think for some of the SM dungeons and RFD, we're going to be expecting a different loot, updated loot. So keep that in mind as I'm reviewing these. I think they're going to keep the main purpose of the items the same, but just upgrade their power level. So let's talk about Scarlet Monastery Graveyard. For Graveyard, I'd highly recommend this as not a main farm, and I say that because similar to Stockades, you're going to run into issues of a 5-hour dungeon lockout because this is quite a short dungeon, and I imagine you'll be clearing it very quickly. The actual dungeon itself isn't very valuable, but it's also not very difficult. There's one mob that I would say you should be concerned about, and that's the Anguished Dead. They apply a Veil of Shadow, which reduces your healing. It's a curse, similar to what you'll find in SFK. So just keep these in mind. Either kill them pretty quickly or before the pulls, or decurse, or bubble, or have a Mage Frost Nova when that comes down. You know, there's a multitude of different ways to handle that. And then as far as the loot goes, there's actually 3 rotating rares in Graveyard. Orb of the Forgotten Seer, which I have listed here, is what comes up with Thalanos. So that's, you know, I think this is like a 40-60% drop. So if you're trying to farm that, you know, you can grab that pretty easily. The other ones are going to be more difficult. Ironspine Eye is obviously amazing. If we could get that now, that would be great. It's not going to be best at 40, but it is a fantastic pure DPS ring. Very nice. If you could pick this up, that would be incredible. On a rogue, for example, nutty. The other thing I want to mention is Morbid Dawn. Now, this is a quick weapon, but it does have good strength on it, and I want to make a point that I don't think is talked about enough, and that is essentially it's not always better to have a slower weapon, specifically in this scenario. You know, maybe. I still think a slow weapon's really good, right? But let's talk about the benefits of a faster weapon, right? With a slow weapon, let's say 3.8, a mob has 30 HP left, you swing at them, boom, right, there's your 3.8 in between. With this weapon, you swing, you're back up in 2.9 instead. So when you're doing dungeon farming and, you know, killing mobs that are lower health, you start to get value out of those faster weapons because you're not wasting time on a weapon swing where you didn't really need all the damage. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's go ahead and talk about Scarlet Monastery Library now. This dungeon I think is going to be a lot better for just spamming. It's quite a bit longer than Graveyard. You still might run into some of those 5-hour timeouts depending on how quick your group is, but I don't think you will. And if you do, I don't think you have to wait a ton, hopefully. But I did want to note the mobs that you should keep an eye out for in this dungeon. You've got the Scarlet Gallant. That's got Hodge. It also increases holy damage taken. So, and these guys specifically I think are mostly in the tunnels, at least like the very beginning tunnel, and then the tunnel after you finish the courtyard where the Houndmaster guy is. And then I think they start to slow down throughout the dungeon. So be careful within those places for this mob, and I would knock him out before you do any crazy pulls. We have the Scarlet Chaplain. This guy has Renew Empowered Shield. I think if you're doing like pretty strong AoE pulls, this guy's not a problem. But if you're kind of just doing like the continuous movement killing thing, you want to take these guys out. The Adepts are in a similar position as the Chaplain there, although their heals are hard cast, so these can be interrupted, LOS, that kind of thing. Diviners are a big problem and something you should definitely be aware of. These guys cast Fireball, but they also have a mana burn. So when you're pulling these, you're going to need to LOS them, obviously, otherwise they're not going to be in your AoE because they're fireballing. But also, it's probably a good idea to tank these near a wall. That way your healer or whoever's getting mana burn can LOS these fairly easily. So I would give you that tip as well. And then Scarlet Monks, these guys have Thrash, which is basically like Wind Fury on an ability. If you don't know, it gives you like 2 extra swings. So these guys have that. They also have a kick, which is an interrupt, right? So if you're a caster or a healer, stay away from these guys because I mentioned this before, but I think they can just kick you even though you're not their target. So that's the mobs. As far as the loot, it's pretty bad. There's some stuff. You can get the whistle off the first boss, which is okay, but it's like 3 charges. You're not really going to be useful. Last boss has the Hypnotic Blade and the Illusionary Rod. I don't think either of these are that great, but if you have worse, go ahead and pick them up. So let's talk about Armory now. I think Armory is going to be quite a good dungeon farm, and also I think it's going to be good to get those good pieces of loot that I think probably will be upgraded potentially by Blizzard. So keep an eye on that, but I would say you're going to be farming this probably a good chunk and right after Library before you go to Cath, and I think it's going to be one of the better dungeons to farm. So the mobs themselves, there's a mob that I don't have listed here that does a Holy Light. It like heals weird. It heals people at full HP. It's very strange, but I didn't. It's not dangerous, so I didn't list it here. We got Scarlet Guardsman. We have Disarms from this guy, a little bit annoying. We've got the Scarlet Defender, who has your standard defensive abilities plus the Shield Bash. Remember, casters stay away. Same thing I said before. And then we have the Scarlet Myrmidon. I think that's how it's said. But they have this Enrage, which I'm not 100% sure if this is off WoWHUD, but I'm not 100% sure if this is what it will be or is in the dungeon right now. I will say that back in Classic, I was doing some like SM farming, and these guys hurt like crazy when this enrages up. So I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this is accurate. So consider doing some like saving some burst, like improved Cone of Cold and stuff for when mobs are getting low, or have a plan to Frost Nova back up or kill these early, right? Just have a strategy, I think, for these, because if you have, I don't know, 5-10 of these wailing on your tank in Rage, you're going to be having a bad time. So talking about the loot that we get within Armory, it's mostly focused on melee DPS, or it's only focused on melee DPS. It is called the Armory after all, right? Let's talk about the Ravager, right? So the Ravager has 3.5 speed, 37.29 DPS. Very solid weapon, right? It's better than the Corpse Maker that we took a look at earlier, although this doesn't have any raw strength on it, but it makes up for it in the damage. It's also faster as well. Now, the effect on this basically it roots you, if you will, or stuns you for 9 seconds while you're doing this like Blade Storm Whirlwind thing every 3 seconds. That does weapon damage plus 5. Now, I do think if you're doing like AoE pulls and dungeon spamming, that this is quite good. Like that effect is something you'll want to see, right? So that's not a bad thing for leveling. Now, as far as the effect itself, I'm almost positive you can't just like click off the debuff. And also, like I said, you're effectively stunned and rooted, so you don't want this on all the time. You can do a little bit of research on the macro itself, but I think there is like a cancel aura macro. I tried to find it, but anyway, you can cancel aura, I believe, the effect, so the name of the effect, and then that would take it off and allow you to walk. The other thing is that I saw people, and I confirmed works, is just swapping your weapon to a different weapon and swapping back. If you want to do that, that's another option. Keybind something for that that you can easily access to get out of it. Pretty annoying, but quite a good axe. Raging Berserker's Helm, very good. 13 strength, 1% crit. The classes get a lot of help for helms from professions. I think every class is getting a helm, but this helm is still very, very good, right? And so you want to be grinding Armory partially for these two items right here, and then that leads us into the Scarlet Legs, which is 20 strength. If you have the ones from BFD off of the Naga Lady, then these aren't a major upgrade. There's a set bonus for the Scarlet Leggings. I don't think anything too crazy comes from that. We also have the drop chances listed here for the first time. I listed them here because I think that these are very important items as we're getting closer to 40 here. So I imagine people will be interested in like how rare these actually are. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to Cath. For Cath, you're basically going to be near the end of your grind at this point because these mobs are like 40 and then the bosses are 42. So you're not going to want to come in here and really grind. You could probably come in here at 38 or 39 if you have a caster heavy group that isn't going to suffer horrible hit rating. Like Rogues and Warriors wouldn't be ideal for something like this. So anyway, I would just say that, and then we're going to cover this just like we did for the other ones because I might as well cover Cathedral. It's one of my favorite dungeons of all time. Ran this thing I don't know how many times. But anyway, let's talk about the Scarlet Wizard. So Scarlet Wizards have an Arcane Explosion, and my understanding is that that Arcane Explosion occurs more often depending on how many enemy characters are nearby. So if you have a full group of like 5 melee, or 4 melee and a healer or whatever, you're going to see this come out a lot more, and it's going to do a ton of damage. So my advice is kill these quickly, especially if you're heavy melee. In general, though, don't stand near these unless you have to. Frostbolt also slows, pretty annoying for the tank. Keep that in mind. We have the Scarlet Abbots. They have Renew and Heal. Think of them as basically just priests. Yeah, you want to kill these first, probably. The thing is, you're also getting champions in the Cathedral where you're going to find these like in the actual church. And those have big damage, so be careful when you're pulling in here. Obviously, they're quite tight, and these are pretty strong mobs. So don't go in here with full reckless abandon. All right, let's be a little smart here. Now, that's pretty much it, I think, really. I don't need to go too much detail there. I will say that there is a boss. If you didn't know, there is a boss on the right side as you're walking into Cathedral. If you go to the end before the boss, you take a right. There's a room over here, and then you hit a little, like a switch that you'll bring down. I'm assuming everyone knows about this, but I'll just say it. that's where you'll find, I think his name is Inquisitor Fairbanks, and that's where you'll get Inquisitor's Shawl, which is this green item here. It's not great, but it may be the best you're going to have at this point. So just wanted to take note of that. And then also, let's talk about the blues here. We've got the shield, which I think is the best one. Aegis of the Scarlet Commander, great strength, great stam, great spirit. There isn't engineering shield for tanks, which is better. But if you're not an engineer, this is a fantastic shield to have. 23 block is very nice. Hand of Righteousness is great for healers, 15 healing done, and 8 spirit. You know, with all the SOD items, this is not nearly as good as it used to be, but if you need it, it's definitely a very nice healing mace. Then we have White Mains, which I don't think is very good. Like, yes, the stats on this are fantastic, but this day and age, you can get a lot more out of a helm slot, especially, like I said, the profession's coming through. Obviously, if you don't have anything great, this is fantastic, but it's got no spell power on it, which is really the problem with this item. Triune Amulet, 7 stam, 7 int, 7 spirit, just a good all-around neck. You know, I think there's going to be so much better than this, but if you don't have a neck that's better than this is very good for healers and very good for caster DPS, mages, warlocks, that kind of thing. Then we have Gauntlets of Divinity Last. These are male, just straight attack power. Not going to be better than the epic gloves from crafting and all that, the leather ones, but you know, pretty good. Again, if they're better than yours, grab them. These are not that great of gloves. They have good attack power on them, but I'm sure you're gonna be able to find something much better. Let's go ahead and finish up with RFD. Now, at this point, I want to mention the loot that I'm gonna show here in a second is very subject to change. They've already released like 3 or 4 different items that have changed in RFD specifically, and also in SM Cath. Now, chasing these down is like trying to catch my own tail, so I'm not necessarily going to do that. I've included them where I can. I updated the White Main Chapeau when I found it. But keep that in mind as you're going through this. I'm not going to talk too much about the specifics of the loot, more like what it's for, because I expect Blizzard to just improve what it's already strong at, as opposed to completely reworking the item. That may not be the case, but that's the assumption I'm going with. So let's talk about the mobs themselves first, though. We have the Death's Head Geomancer. These guys have a slow. Now, it doesn't last very long, so not the biggest concern, but something to keep in mind if you're doing big pulls. The Frozen Soul is super annoying. These guys usually pat with like a guy that casts a Frostbolt, I think, like a skeleton. But anyway, if you're a caster, stay very far away from these. They have an AoE silence, similar to, you know, the bats from RFK or SFK. You have the silences as well. Then we have the Splinterbone Captain. They have a backhand that will stun you. They also have a bunch of mobs around them, like their little soldiers, that I don't think do anything too concerning. Then we've got Skeletal Summoner here. This guy has Cursed Lightning Bolt, blah, 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 but he's also got a summon that takes a while. You know, you can kick, interrupt this. You know, if you're big pulling here, I'm not sure it's going to be the end of the world, but be careful of these guys because they do summon ads. So for RFD loot, this is really going to be your end game dungeon, right? Think like SFK last phase, right? This is your around level 40. The loot's around level 40. They seem to be updating these pieces, so you're going to probably be spending a good amount of time in here, you know, post dungeon spamming, which indicates that you probably want to be coming here to dungeon spam sooner rather than later, right? So let's talk through these pieces really quick, and I kind of assume they're all going to be updated, but we got the Fleshhide Shoulders. These are historically really good for leather wearers. Now, they have 15 stamina. I kind of expect them to take some of that back and add it into agility and strength. We'll have to see, though. Very good shoulders. We have this cape here with 9 int and 9 healing. I think, honestly, this one might already have been updated. It looks quite good, but very good. This is from a rare, though, so keep that in mind. We have the Cold Rage Dagger. Pretty solid, not insane here. I think this will definitely get an upgrade, though, so keep an eye on that. We've got the plate chest piece. This is off the first boss, if I remember correctly. I expect this to get upgraded, but it's already very good. Now, Excalibur is an interesting one. This is 3.3 speed, 37 DPS, so this is faster than the Ravager, but it does have 20 strength on it. I would be honestly surprised if they did not release a new version of this one. I am willing to bet that this is going to be close to like a pre-raid BIS if it is upgraded. So anyway, keep this one in mind. I think they would make like a level 38, 40 version of this. We've got Ice Metals, pretty good helm, but we got Raging Berserker helm and the profession ones. I don't think it's going to be that good. We've got Dead Mage Sash, 15 intellect, but now we have spell power ones from tailoring, so expect either tailoring thing to be better than this or them to update this with spell power. We've got the Savage Boar's Guard, which is a pretty good shield. Yeah, not a ton to say on that. Robes of the Lich, which did already get updated. They used to have just stamina int. And then we have Glowing Eye, Mordress, Swine Fist, and the Finger here, which is a wand that gives spell power. I think these are all pretty good. But again, pay attention to what is dropping and what gets updated, because I think these are all likely to change. And that's really all I wanted to talk about in this video. I think Phase 2 is going to be super exciting, a lot of fun. I think there's going to be a lot of changes from the itemization that I have listed here. Go ahead and if you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. That means so much to me. Also, comments about your thoughts are more than welcome, very much encouraged. So thanks again for watching. Thanks for all the support recently. Really appreciate it. Have a good one. Cam out.
Cam out.